Welcome to the Passion of Entrepreneurship. I'm Ravi Tangri, and every weekday in June, I am bringing you an incredible entrepreneur to share their journey of what got them going in this arena and how they've come through different challenges, including our most latest challenge over the last several months. And my absolute pleasure today to bring you one of the leading fashion designers, Lisa Drader-Murphy. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you, Ravi.
So, Lisa, when you started your career, you didn't start out as an entrepreneur. You graduated from design school and you went and worked for a manufacturer, correct?
I did. I've always been entrepreneurial, so there has always been ideas brewing and stirring. But when I graduated, you're correct, I did go and I worked for a number of manufacturers within the garment manufacturing industry, and in a variety of capacities. So, some of my first jobs were sweeping that cutting room floor and doing what I was told to do and just absorbing the environment that I was in and learning as much as I could.
So really working your way up from the bottom, literally.
I certainly did. I had that goal in mind. I knew jobs were going to be hard to find. And I graduated in 1990 at the top of my class. And I ended up the next day, I was one of the least employable designers in Canada because I had no experience. So that piece of paper was great on the wall, but it didn't really get me in the door, as quickly as a lot of people assume that it would.
So what was it that you had a few jobs with different companies? What was it that you gained from that time that you were able to take forward with you?
I don't even know where to start. How long? I learned so much from bosses that I've had. Co-workers, just even the environment that I worked in, manufacturing, developing production lines, engineering production lines for efficiency. I set up a few companies that I worked for on their ISO 9001 certification for design. So my focus was very technical. I was most challenged by those big problems to solve.
Okay.
That's the path I was drawn down, which is why I ended up for many years specializing in technical industrial apparel. The challenge was there.
Which is interesting considering where you've come now.
Correct.
So you said to learn from bosses, then it wasn't just what you need to be a good designer then that you took in from them.
No, it was how to run a company, how to manage people, how to negotiate tenders, how to source raw materials. There's so many things, and I was determined to learn everything from the bottom up. I wanted to know how every machine operated. I wanted to know how to operate an industrial cutting machine, which I do to this day. And it's really helped me in the verticality of the business as it operates today. Many emerging designers will come to me and say, well, I love what you're doing, but I'm going to learn this part, and then I'm going to subcontract everything else out. And unfortunately, a lot of those designers are not in business right now because they didn't have the verticality to turn on a dime. When the factory was subcontracted to, had to shut down for COVID, their production was done. Or when their pattern maker couldn't come to work or provide the product that they were providing in the past, they didn't have patterns to even start the production process. So we have that advantage of having absolutely every stage in-house. The only thing we don't do is, grow the cotton and make the fabric. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yet.
4 acres. I'm looking out at my acreage right now. 4 acres. I could probably run a good little mill out here.
Tell ya. I wouldn't be surprised. It's like every day something pops up on your pages and you
can't help it.
So it sounds like then all that time you had in the back of your mind that you were going to step out on your own. You needed to learn all this and just bring it in.
I think subconsciously I knew that. It wasn't my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal was to continuously be challenged and continuously learn. And I think that I got to a space where once I became head of design for a manufacturer and then director of design and product development for another major manufacturer, that the challenges weren't quite where I needed them to be. So that's when entrepreneurship started taking a ride in my mind. Where can I take this myself, and what can I do with all the knowledge I've been acquiring these years?
So you actually got to that director level and said, my hands are still tied.
Yeah, kind of like, okay, this has been fun. I've learned a lot. Oh, I report to the president. I guess I have to become a president. Then that's basically what I did. I created my own presidency.
Okay. So let's talk about that, because I mean, going from an organization where you've got all these supports, all of that, into your own business, what was the emotional journey there that you had to be able to build the confidence to make that transition? Can you remember what the journey was that you went through?
Oh my goodness, the confidence. Well, I think that I've just always been naive when it comes to that. It's that I don't know that I'm completely confident yet. That comes with trial and error and successes. And to reach every success, I'm sure you know this as an entrepreneur, you have to have a dozen failures first.
Mm-hmm.
That's the learning process. That's what makes us succeed eventually. So confidence is kind of a funny. I haven't achieved it yet. I don't.
Okay, so it's work in progress.
It totally is a work in progress. Yeah.
So it's do you subscribe somewhat to the ready, fire, aim mentality?
Somewhat. Maybe not the guerrilla warfare style, but I have goals, short-term, long-term challenges, and I feel the most fulfillment when I'm on that path towards reaching it.
Yes.
Once I reach it, great. Now it's time for a new one.
Next.
Yeah. What's next? What's the next thing? So there's always something brewing. There's always something on the horizon.
So how did you actually start your business? What area you started just with the design, not with the manufacturing originally, correct?
Actually, I did everything fairly simultaneously.
Really?
Pretty much. I was head of design for a manufacturing company in Calgary at the time. And I think I may have shared part of this story with you before, but I was called back from my maternity leave. My daughter, who's now 23, was only 9 days old. And I got a call and I was told, your maternity leave replacement isn't quite working out. We really need you to come back. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, you're joking, right? Like, this can't be. She's 9 days old. Can I please have 6 months at least? Because that's what it was at the time for maternity leave. And no, I went back. I had a sign on my door that said, knock quietly, baby sleeping, or breastfeeding in progress. Don't end. It was very much a blur to me because I was exhausted the entire time with having this little newborn with me and trying to meet the demands of a job in leadership. But we made it work. Shortly after going back to work, I would take my daughter and bundle her up. You remember the little snuggly wrapping things?
Yep.
I don't know if you did that with your kids or not, but I bundle her up in her snuggly and walk through the production floor. And there's nothing like the hum of 300 industrial sewing machines, the white noise to put a baby to sleep.
I love it.
Anyone with a colicky baby, just find a factory. You're good. You're golden.
Walk through.
Exactly.
I love it.
Yeah.
So that sort of pushed you to say, okay, enough at that point. If I'm going to do work this hard, I'm going to work for me. That
was part of it. On one of those cruises through the production factory, I ended up at the very back of the factory floor, and there was an annexed warehouse. And I'd never been in it before. And I thought, I'm a little curious, and I'm here. I'm going to check it out. Why not? And it was full of vintage tailoring menswear, like suiting.
Okay.
beautiful wool, like Harris tweed and
Mm-hmm.
gorgeous, just gorgeous wools that we can't even find today. And I went to my boss and I said, I was out walking, putting my baby to sleep, and I went in the warehouse and why do you have all this wool? Because at the time we were doing technical industrial apparel. So firefighting gear and oil and gas programs and that sort of thing. And he said, well, my father immigrated from Poland and was a tailor, and that's how the company started. He was a one-man show with a little tailor shop, and this was back in like this early 60s. And eventually his tailor shop grew to include dry cleaning and then alterations and then a full production line. And then a service company would come to him and say, we need 30 shirts for this such and such service company. And it grew into one of Alberta's largest manufacturing companies from that stage. So all of this wool was kept. And I said, I'm interested. I want to do something with it. And they're like, that old stuff? Okay, go ahead. So about a week later, I had pulled a few of my sample makers from the production line, and we did an impromptu fashion show in the boardroom. And I called the president and the general manager, who were two brothers.
I remember this now, yeah.
Yeah. And I showed them this fashion show. My sample makers were my models. So it was just kind of fun and really fairly low key, but they were quite intrigued. And I remember one of the comments being, oh, Dad used to wear that fabric in a leisure suit or something. And now it was a midi skirt with a little jacket, a tailored jacket on a woman. And after the show, everybody went back to work. Lunchtime was over. And David, the GM of the company, said, let's talk about this. I'm quite intrigued with this. He said, I have an offer for you. Okay. You take all that fabric, you design the collection, you do all of the marketing, you open our first retail store, I'll do the manufacturing, and I'll give you 10%. 3 hours later, we were 50-50 partners.
Oh, I love this.
And then 6 months later, I bought him out on retained earnings. Okay. So it was, I had $250 in my bank account at the time. We just bought our first house. I had a newborn baby. There were expenses that were new to a young family that really I didn't have really anything extra, even though I was working, and, it was not the really lush times for many families when you're at that stage of your
not at all
development. So, I was able to pull that off with that $250 extra that I was able to scramble together, and spent weekends going back into the factory and using the CAD system and, drafting all of the patterns, doing the grading, doing the product development. And that's how I started. So yeah, it was from the time that I discovered that fabric, within 9 months, I was sole owner of my own manufacturing and retail company.
That's brilliant. I mean, basically, you got this other company to finance you.
Basically, kind of, yeah.
And
they got part of it too.
Brilliant. Pardon?
It was a win-win.
Oh, it totally was. But it's a brilliant way to build a business when you didn't have the capital yourself.
Yeah, thank you. It's, I believe there are so many ways. I mean, there are so many ways to achieve a win-win with a partner, with another company. And I encourage people to look at what your assets are. What can you provide? You might not have a lot of money, but you may have something else that's worth something to someone. There may be a resource that's been undervalued or overlooked for years, which was, in my case, which was the situation. And, you don't have to have a big bankroll behind to get something started. It's based on principles. And the principles for me were, I have these resources. If I'm going to leverage these resources, I have to produce a widget that I can sell for double the cost of making it, so that I can replace it with 2 more. And that's how I started, with 1 widget up to 5 stores and my own production facility. And now we have a hospitality company as well. But it all started from that very beginning, those very humble beginnings.
Right. And you've had, over your career, you've had some things, for example, you had to, you chose to step back for a bit when you were uh, spending more time with your family,
Mhm.
correct? And moved here. So
Yep.
you had to really ramp up again,
Yes. Yes. And it
right?
took much, much longer to ramp up in rural Nova Scotia than it did in downtown Calgary.
Okay.
But it was a choice. The children were very young. They were 6 and 1.5.
Yeah.
And I was working many, many hours. I had, at the time in Calgary, I had a gig on an international television show. I was a regular design expert on that show. I was doing a lot of breakfast television makeovers. I was running my company. I had 2 stores. I was signing my lease on a 3rd in Banff, and also consulting to the manufacturing industry as a technical designer, which is a very
Wow.
difficult thing for me to let go of. So I would travel usually about 10 days a month, and I worked for every company in Canada that developed and produced technical industrial apparel at the time. And then I'd come home and I'd have to be in the green room at 4 a.m. because I'd have a makeover show that I was doing on A Channel, or filming for something, and then I'd have to go and design and produce and run the retail store. So
Right.
it was a lot of work, and I
And
was
that makes it hard to be with your kids, really hard when you're.
Mm-hmm. But being opportunity driven the way that I am, I knew that I had to extricate myself from the environment in order to change my habits.
You can't do it a little bit.
No, it really did take me moving, and the choice to move to rural Nova Scotia was a huge move. And I'm telling you, the first year I questioned what I had done a couple of times. I mean, I'm a city girl, or I was a city girl.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember getting up, and we bought this old farmhouse. It's a sea captain's home, but it was in dire need of renovation, which we've since done. But I looked out my kitchen window, and there was a cow looking at me, and are you kidding me? Like, what have I done?
Well, you were a cowgirl.
Yeah, I guess I was in Calgary. That's true. You're right. I hadn't thought of that. It was probably a cow going, she's one of us. We can welcome her to the neighborhood. But a neighboring pen had opened accidentally, and somebody's cow was looking at me through my window.
Love it. So at the first time you actually got, the company you'd been working for to finance you, how did you build your business the second time? What was you said it was slower.
Well, not building the business per se, because the business was established. I already had all of my equipment. I owned everything outright. And I grow my company on retained earnings. So no debt, no government funding, no debt, nothing like that. So I'm very conservative when it comes to that. And I'm so grateful that I was, because that all made perfect sense for what we're doing today in spite of these changes with COVID. And so it did work out.
So
Building my clientele was the thing that took longer.
So what I find that as well fascinating, because a lot of people do look at how much debt can I leverage, but your philosophy from the beginning has been, I'm not going to get any debt.
I don't want any, none. And I've had people, when I started my company in Calgary, I remember being called into a bank meeting, and they were so impressed. These bankers sitting around the table, and 27-year-old me is sitting there. Oh, you like my business? I'm so happy you like my business. And they wanted to fast track. They said, we can have 10 stores open for you in 18 months. Here's what we want to do, because what you have is a formula that's working. And I was the first one that I'm aware of that had a sustainability aspect to my concepts. So the fabric I was using was unused vintage. So it wasn't creating a demand for the production of more raw materials. It was using an already existing, source of supply.
Okay.
And that was catching on like wildfire. And it's now you're almost expected to recycle and to, upcycle and all of that. But that wasn't the case in 1997 at all. In fact, I had many designers tell me that I was just shooting myself in the foot. Nobody is going to like what you're doing. And I said, you know what? I like it. Somebody else will like it.
Yep.
And I stood by that. I'm very, I try to follow my intuition. Every time I don't.
I wanted to touch on that. Like, how important is intuition when it comes to, let's say a business decision, the logical, rational decision is to go that way, but your intuition's to say going this way.
It's very important to me. It's everything that I've done that might have seemed now a little bit ahead of its time was based on following intuition.
I love that.
And that's what I said to the bankers. I said, I don't want a loan. I don't want to have 10 stores, in Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Winnipeg, Regina. Like, they had a whole plan laid out within 18 months. I said, I don't think I'd enjoy it. I need to enjoy this, or it's not going to be fruitful.
Right.
There has to be something that fills my soul, that challenges me creatively. And that would have been the end of me. I truly believe that, because I have since seen so many designers that are drawn into that. And next thing you know, they have no ownership, no shares in their own business. They're a figurehead. They don't have a say. And eventually those businesses disappear.
Right. And you know what? It makes total sense, because I know, just sort of like seeing you on social media, you had your one store for a long while. Mm-hmm. And then a second store came. Mm-hmm. And then it seemed boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Right. But that was because the retained earnings had grown. That just your rate of growth just makes so much sense, because it's
that, but also my children had grown.
Yeah.
That was a big impetus. I had said that as soon as my youngest reached middle school, mm-hmm. that I would look at opening a store outside of my studio showroom. And then went from there. It grew from there. So that was a big part of it. I could have opened sooner, but I had made this commitment to be at home, even if home meant, the commercially zoned building that was on my acreage, working from there. But it was an amazing time. I got to spend time with the kids, and we had a very family-friendly environment. I had staff there for about 8 years. I ran a restaurant there as well as a studio and showroom.
Okay.
Because I have to do things that,
Well, this is a common thread. Entrepreneurs have multiple businesses.
It's true. But what was really great about it was my kids would come home from school and they would go straight out to the studio, the cafe, the whatever we were doing at the time. And they would, color and hang out. But my staff would bring their kids after school too. So we did this little built-in after-school program, and it was so amazing for all of us. It was a really special time because they could have a job that was fulfilling and different and interesting, and they wouldn't have to worry about what are we going to do with our children after school, or am I only going to be able to work till 3 every day? It worked out really nicely, and we formed this tight little community during those years, and it was really great.
And yeah, because a lot of businesses are very, oh no, this is work. You've got to find the boundaries. But I love the fact that you merged and flowed with it to understand everybody. And
I think it's important. I think opportunities are lost, and great relationships won't be founded unless they're explored from those different perspectives.
Absolutely. It just opens so many doors.
Mm-hmm.
So you had come to the point where we were chatting about this before, where you had sort of stepped up to another level of life, where you were planning to be spending part of the year in France at a home you had there, and all of this had just happened, and then COVID hit.
Yes. Yeah, it was how sometimes things might, I don't know if you experience this, but I do. When things seem too perfect, I'll go, okay, what gives? Like, I'm looking behind my back, So it was at that point, which is just so funny.
So you were actually thinking that?
Yeah, I was like,
careful what you think.
Exactly. I said, how did this all happen? My staff, my stores are still working. I get to leave for a month at a time. I'm course, on the phone with them, and emails are flying. We're still in touch, but it was really idyllic. It was a beautiful, beautiful time. And, it's just a different time now. It's still beautiful. I enjoy everything that I do. I have to, or I have to be passionate about it, or I'm not going to be successful with it.
I love that. Now, something that you had, that again, we spoke about was the candor that you had even on your Facebook page of sharing your journey the last few months, right? Because you went through a time where you were very much in fear about what's coming.
Yeah, definitely very much in fear. I was worried for my staff. I didn't know what the government was going to be rolling out. So my staff are thankfully okay. And some of them stayed, some of them got hired back very quickly after the layoff to help us with this pivot. But it was scary. I didn't know what was going to happen. I thought, okay, I'll be burning through, I've got all these commercial leases. I'll just be burning through what I built this last number of years, and I'll be starting over at the age of 50. And
so share with me how this change came about from that place to where you were able to find something that actually made a difference that you could bring your talents to.
Well, I became concerned when I started seeing the narrative, the sort of underground narrative about face masks permeate all of our social platforms, and the recommendation for certain fibers over other fibers. And based on my long history of technical industrial product development, I was very nervous about that. And I thought, okay, nothing's been recommended yet, but I started getting calls from people who knew of my background. And one in particular was a doctor on the front lines in New York City. And saying, we're going into work wearing bandanas. We have no PPE. And I was like, well, I'm not certified to make PPE. Like, I don't have the certified factory. I know how this works. I remember I designed ISO 2001 certification programs for large factories. I'm all about the testing and the certification and the protocols. And I get that more than many designers that haven't branched into the side of the industry that I have. And so I was very, very reticent to do anything at first. And then I started seeing people putting cotton on their face, and that made me very concerned. And so I did my own research, and I reached out to wear trial scientists, material scientists around the world. I read a number of documents and summaries of wear trials, and every single one of them had failed incredibly.
This is with cotton.
The cloth mask, the cloth, yeah. But also, I would say 90% of them also said they didn't qualify cotton, they qualified cloth. Well, cloth isn't cloth. Come on. That's like saying, well, we tested, 50% of people who drank fluid got very ill. So we do not endorse fluid. Like, that's what kind of fluid? Gasoline? Distilled water?
Disinfectant.
Yeah, right. Disinfectant. Oh my.
Let's not go there.
No. So that's where my concern went deeper. And sure enough, I asked a number of these scientists, what kind of cloth were you using? Oh, cotton. Generally, we use cotton. I said, well, you realize that the only fiber more permeable than cotton is bamboo. Like, the fiber itself inherently draws moisture in from the air. And I suggested to a couple of these scientists that I had more of an exchange with that perhaps neoprene would be a better choice, and they agreed. And so that was the only endorsement I needed to follow through with my theory. I knew that I felt strongly that what I was purporting was going to be safer than what the narrative floating around was. And that's where I started with that. But I think your question was, I think I rambled past what your
That's
question was.
okay. I mean, I think this is highly topical right now because a lot of people, you see people. My mom was making a homemade mask. Everyone was proud of, I've made these masks. But if they're cotton, what you're saying is it's actually, in some ways, it may even be worse than not.
Well, and this was one of the wear trials I read after finding out, or finding out later that it was indeed cotton that was used, said that the mask wearers had a higher level of infection than the non-mask wearers. And that really, yes.
Wow.
And they don't all say that, but I think it depends, again, on the environment that you're in. There are many other variables that need to be considered. For example, if two people walk into a room and one is wearing maybe a neoprene or a synthetic mask of the right density, and the other one's wearing a cotton mask, in a humid room, at the end of the day, the cotton mask will be damp and the other one will not. It will be bone dry. So I think these were things that the wheels just started turning, and I'm really hoping that Health Canada will respond to my many emails and calls and start doing something to amend that narrative. They don't have to say, this is what we recommend, but I think the fact that and they don't call it a recommendation for cotton. Well, we can't recommend anything. We're just saying, well, that's an easy fabric to find. But I'm hoping they'll amend that recommendation and let the people that are on the ground doing the research adjust that narrative in a more organic way.
Because I don't know about Health Canada, but I know I looked a couple of weeks ago at these things, and some of these official sites, whether it was CDC or Health Canada, were saying of cloth such as cotton, double layers is what they said, make it double layer. But I didn't realize that it was that bad, that it was actually worse than not having a mask, possibly, because the moisture, I guess, just wicks in.
Yeah, there are studies with that result. So, I mean, I'm going on the research. I'm not making it up as I go. Yeah. I started researching with an open mind because that's what, I come from a more of a scientific background in garment manufacturing than I do a fashion.
And I'm a scientist originally, right? So I go by science too.
Yeah. And I'm happy. I'd be completely fine if somebody proved me wrong. I just want people to be safe. And I didn't feel that the narrative was helping people. There's one of the scientists that I spoke to in Australia, I suggested, perhaps the cotton mask this is before this was public knowledge. This was like, I think like August 20th or 18th or something. I was having this discussion with her. I said, I feel like the cotton mask might protect other people if the wearer is ill, but it's more dangerous if the wearer is not ill and is surrounded by people who are infected. And she said, absolutely. Right. She said, absolutely.
Although I guess the general sense thing that I have heard for masks is they don't really protect you. They're protecting others if you are.
Exactly. I mean, and that's what the general statement is coming from Dr. Tam and the, CDC and Health Canada, which I totally get. But initially, I was getting calls, and we're talking hundreds of queries. Will you make us masks?
Wow.
Because I'm immunocompromised, or because I have a number of seniors living with me. And that's what really scared me, was that there was this false sense of they were being protected, where with the wrong fiber, you're actually putting yourself at higher risk. So that's what led me on the path to this research and prompted me to reach out to people who knew more about it than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still doing the research. I'm still, I'd like to know more about it. It's a great challenge for me. It is exercising a muscle in me that hasn't been exercised as much in the past 10, 15 years. And we'll see what happens.
So, what this, the calls and such you got, obviously this showed you that there's a demand for something here anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you used your expertise to find the best product that you could create. I mean, I've got some of your masks. I got them for my mom and my son and such. But the and I love that you've still brought in your fashion element to them. But we were chatting earlier that fashion has changed, where this is going to be part of fashion now,
Absolutely.
or already is.
It is. It's every designer out there is doing something. Whether they're doing masks that have a beautiful long scarf attached to it that swaddles your neck and your body, they're all doing something. So it's going to be here to stay, I think, for quite some time. And we're going to see it on the runways, and we're going to see people wanting, I'm already seeing people saying, like, what are your new designs going to be like? I don't know. I'm too busy making current ones.
I was going to ask, have you already started exploring what?
We are exploring it a little bit now. Now that there's we've reached over the past few weeks a bit of a plateau in terms of inquiries and orders, and we're still very, very busy. But when this first launched, when we first started making the masks, we sold about over 3 weeks worth of production in about 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And it was really terrifying. I thought, how am I going to do this? So I cut everything off. I paused my website. I paused for a few days, at least at that time. And then the phone didn't stop ringing. When are they going to be back in stock? So I knew that, I'd opened this can of worms, and I needed to figure out a way to now fulfill these orders and fulfill the sort of the demand that was beginning to grow and grow daily. But now we're able to take a little more time and spend it on the research again. I've opened up my emails again and spent more time reaching out and communicating with the scientists that I did in the beginning, hoping that there'll be something will come of that in the future, maybe in terms of wear trials or further testing, not of my masks in particular. I'm not creating a narrative so that I can build my business.
Right.
To be clear, I'm hoping that anyone who has a sewing machine, who can sit at a table and provide themselves with a little bit of income, or provide, their loved ones with some protection, will have the right information in their hands.
Right. So instead of just grabbing cotton, that they're getting the right material and such.
Yeah. And that narrative has been changing, because I believe that it was on Health Canada. One of the websites was suggesting take your used T-shirts and cut them this way and that way and use them as a mask. And I just about fell over. Used T-shirts are good for one thing: mopping up wet spills. Why would there be a suggestion to put the best thing for mopping up wet spills on your face to protect you?
I saw a meme about how you can turn socks into a face mask.
Yeah, I know.
Talk about permeability.
Yeah. So.
But
so your question, I am working on some new designs. We're having a little bit more fun with it now that we have time in our studio. And we're also now putting out our collection that we had started in March, and It's really great to get some good reviews from that as well.
Excellent. Now, what enabled you to do this is you said you had already had the infrastructure, you had the vertical. That was a strategic decision you had made. Plus, you had made the decision to operate without debt, which is giving you a lot more strength, I think, than others in this time.
Yeah.
So those were things that you had decisions you'd made long ago.
Indeed.
So in this time, I'm curious now for your thoughts, because I know you do a lot of mentoring as well. For business owners, for entrepreneurs who've seen their business go, right? The rug pulled out from under them, and are saying, I can't do it anymore. I can't, the way I did it, it doesn't work. And are feeling, perhaps as you did when this first hit, before you discovered a way to channel your energy. How would you advise business owners and entrepreneurs in terms of finding a way to move forward at this time?
Well, I think it's a scary time for those who, we're operating on a house of cards where anything would have toppled it. It's just demolished it. But for those who still are hanging in there, I think it's really important to review your assets, review your resources, look at them from every different perspective that you can, and think creatively. It's, I've been up and down and everywhere in between financially, and with my businesses over the years, and there's always been a way. I've always found that golden nugget if I looked hard enough. This is what's going to make this work, or potentially. And sometimes you work really, really hard. Like I said earlier, you have to fail a dozen times for that one success. But if you have the ability to work hard and keep reviewing your resources over and over and over again, you may find that special something that you can turn around or use or leverage to create, some success.
And sort of linked to this, how do you, when you're under all this pressure, how do you replenish yourself?
Well, are you talking today or the past 2 months? Or it's been very stressful, I will say.
Yes.
It worked initially when that first launch on the website was bought up within a couple of hours. I thought, I'll have enough here. I'll sell this for a month. Didn't happen that way. I was working a minimum of 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there were days that I was out there in my studio, 18 hours. I'd come in, sleep for 4, set the alarm, go right back out and keep working. And I didn't want to let people down. People had placed orders. People were believing in the theory that I was presenting and putting their money where their words were. And I was like, I can't let them down. So I had no balance for a good solid 2 months. And it was fairly distressing. And then as things began to settle into this more plateaued, consistent routine, and that we got over that big peak, we had a saying in our studio, flatten the curve. It's been Dr. Can's saying. Ours was flatten the peak. Like, how do we, because we repeat our orders from the past 8 weeks. So we're like, this.
Yeah.
And then now they're like this. And it's very nicely manageable. But it was very difficult to find any sort of balance during that time. Now I've taken, the first day I took off since it started was Mother's Day. And I'm trying to take my Sundays off now. So it's getting better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Lisa, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to share your journey with me and your insights.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
It's an absolute delight for this. So just to let everyone know, again, every weekday in June, I'm going to be speaking with a different entrepreneur at 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern time, 1 o'clock Atlantic, 5 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. So join me on that. We'll be starting up again Monday. Also, right now, I'm doing a study for business owners on what do you need to excel at to be able to thrive through these times and beyond. And we're using a process called thought exchange, where it's just that one question. You answer that one question. What do you need to be great at to move through this time? Mm-hmm. And then you'll get to see what the other people answer. And you can rank their answers on how important they are to you personally from 1 to 5. And so in that way, we're going to see how entrepreneurs across the board, how business owners across the board feel what they identify as important. So I'm just going to pop this into the comments of this video. So I'd really appreciate if you could take a few minutes to do that, because we want to hear what your perspective is in terms of what you think you need to be great at to move through this. So thank you, Lisa, so much. I truly enjoy this. I love the times when I get to chat with you.
Well, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
And
you're inspiring. Thank you for doing what you're doing. You're just a very thoughtful, intelligent voice. And it's really a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say also thank you for what you're doing, the dedication that you have, but make sure you're gentle with you as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you on Monday. Yeah.